All right. So hopefully the slides should be up. Yeah. Now.
Yes.
Yes, so thank you very much for the introduction, Didi, and for inviting us to and allowing us to contribute to this wonderful environment by sharing our story and our practices. So with me today, I'm Henrik, and I head the evaluation and analysis department in our impact area. And with me today, I have Gert and Katrine Iversen, who also work in the evaluation and analysis department. And then I have Rasmus Lund Jensen, who is head of data in the impact area. And yeah, I think the video switched a bit, so now you're in the screen again. Yeah. Together we make sure with our colleagues in the impact area that impact management has a place in the Novo Nordisk Foundation. Now, acting on impact management, which is to have a shared evaluation culture, to have a structured way of approaching data, to distribute data to many different stakeholders. That's what we mean by impact management. And that is a collective effort of the whole foundation, and also a very big change management exercise, and a continuous change management exercise for us, as when we've just trained those who've been around for a while, we get 30 to 50 new colleagues every year. So we're growing rapidly. So it's a constant task to onboard people to impact management, or just basically having an evaluation culture. So I'll kick the session off with my presentation, which is more about the background of the foundation, so that you have an idea about what it is that we do and why we do what we do. So the Novo Nordisk Foundation is the wealthiest foundation in the world, private foundation. It's the third largest private funder in the world after the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Wellcome Trust. The way we fund, and we fund only for the public benefit, is through the money we earn from our corporate investment activities. So those money come in either from a very large financial portfolio, dividends from Novo Nordisk, the insulin producer, and now also Wegovy producer. And then it's from Novozymes, which is a large industrial biotech solutions company. And then about 160 other companies where we own a smaller or a larger stake in, all within the life science space. Now, the history of the foundation began a little more than 100 years ago. These six people, Marie Krogh and August Krogh, the Peterson brothers to the right, Fosse and August Kongsted, these six people actually represent what we're all about. It's about understanding the necessity of basic research, the translation of research results, the commercial success, and the impact on people, and the need for the right investors. And that's essentially what the foundation does. It distributes money for certain purposes, which are to the benefit of the public. But it's also a very crucial investor in the life science space. So the story began about 100 years ago when August Krogh received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. And as part of what you do when you get the Nobel Prize, you go on a tour. And August Krogh and Marie Krogh, they were both scientists, by the way. They went to the US on a tour. And while they were in the US, Marie Krogh had found out that researchers at Toronto University had produced insulin, so extracted it. And Marie Krogh actually had diabetes, so she convinced her husband August to write to these researchers in Toronto, notably McLeod, and ask if he could come and visit them and hear more about the insulin. And so he went to Toronto, and that conversation went rather well. He was given the rights to produce insulin in the Nordic countries. And so he went back with the promise to produce insulin, but also to give back to society. So what he did was he started the company Nordic Insulin Laboratory, but he also started a foundation. So the foundation was the owner of the company from the beginning, and the foundation would distribute proceeds back to society. Now, what's interesting here is that he would team up with Fosse, and that had already happened before they went to the US, because Heydorn was a diabetes doctor, he was a very successful diabetes doctor and was called to Copenhagen to do research. And Copenhagen was an even smaller place then than it is today. So everyone knew everyone, and Heydorn and August Krogh, they formed a relationship, but Marie Krogh and Heydorn maybe formed an even closer relationship. She having diabetes and also being a nutrition and metabolic researcher, and him with the purpose of treating diabetes patients. So when August Krogh came back with the right to produce insulin, him and Heydorn, they went into the basement of Heydorn's house, and they started producing insulin. And within 3 months, they had produced the first batch of insulin. And it turned out that they would be very successful, but they needed to team up with other people. First of all, they needed an investor, and that investor became August Kongsted, who was a very entrepreneurial spirit back in those days. That's when you didn't have big pharmaceutical companies, but he did have a chemical factory associated with his pharmacy. And so they started producing there, actually at no cost, but they did say, you will get the money back. And he certainly did get the money back. But to scale up and do better, he had to hire the two scientists, August Krogh and the clinician Fosse Heydorn. They had to hire specialists. So they hired Thorvald Petersen and Harald Petersen. Now they were a chemist and a civil engineer, and they were instrumental to developing those new instruments that August Krogh suggested that they needed to scale up production. So these two specialists were instrumental in professionalizing the production. But it only took about a year or two before they went into a disagreement, because Heydorn, he really couldn't work with the Petersen brothers. So the Petersen brothers said, we'll leave, and they started another company. That company would then compete with August Krogh and Fosse Heydorn's company. Nordisk Insulin Laboratorium, Nordic Insulin Laboratorium, would compete with Nordic Therapeutical Laboratorium. And those two competed fiercely for 65 years in purifying and increasing production. And they were both doing very well, but it was a very tiresome attrition war between the two in Little Denmark, having two very excellent insulin producers. So by 1989, pharma had grown really big, and they were afraid actually that if they were competing so fiercely internally, the big competitors outside would just be ready to grab them once they were very tired. So they decided to merge. And so Nordisk Insulin Laboratory and what was now called Novo Industries, those two merged into Novo Nordisk. And the same did the foundations behind it. They formed into the Novo Nordisk Foundation. And since then, the company has been extremely successful, and that has generated an enormous amount of wealth for the foundation. And that means that until the mid-2000s, the foundation was merely a sleeping giant. We had a CEO and 4 part-time employees. Today, we're about 200 employees in the foundation and another 200 employees in Novo Holdings, the company that administers all our investments. So the corporate bankers, basically. Yeah. So the promise that August Koh took back with him from Canada when he was given the rights to produce insulin in the Nordic countries was to give back to society. So the purpose of the foundation has always been dual, and it's been that for 100 years. There's a corporate purpose, which is to grow and earn as much money as we can. Simple. But the second purpose is to give back to society, and that is to support physiological, endocrinological, metabolic, and other medical research, and to support research hospital activities in the spirit of Fosse, and then to support other scientific as well as humanitarian and social purposes. So even though the foundation was a sleeping giant, the purpose and the way we live by those, by the purpose and by the vision, which is to improve people's health and the sustainability of society and planet, is inherently 100 years old. That's why we invest in basic research. That's why we invest in applied research and translational research, in bridging the gap between research and innovation, in science-based societies, in investing in spurring STEM education among youngsters, adolescents, and also choosing the right technical or scientific educations further along the way. That's our DNA. Now, to fulfill such a strategy, we realized that we needed what we call impact management, which is a unified approach to evaluation. So it's generated from our area, but it's lived by everyone in the foundation. But it involves also linking that to a unified approach to collect data, and then distribute those data at all levels of the organization, from the board of directors and the societal stakeholders. So we're also very big in a very small country, funding 15% of public research. And then down to the strategic level, how are we actually doing it? How are we living the strategy? And then learning also from whether we are actually funding things in the right way, or whether we need to adjust the design of our instruments. So we're back. I think we're here. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We're back. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you lose anything or?
No? You were frozen for a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I need to repeat anything?
Maybe the last 10 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. So
were
you with us here?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we can do annual reports with our data. We can do dashboards, or we can do evaluations, and everything comes swiftly and comes from the same data source, basically, which has been structured ever since we designed the instruments that we have. So to do this, we need to build a common, we need to build a culture that requires a common language.
Yes.
And to tell that story,
sorry to interrupt, Henrik. We cannot see your slides at the moment.
Okay. So that's not good. Yeah. I'll just have to get the Zoom. Yeah, window sharing. Here we go. Okay.
We can see them now. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're back. Yeah. So we're just saying we have these different products, right? And they all build on the same data source. So building a language requires, or building a culture requires a common language. And that language we implement through a tool. And Gert will talk about this tool. Then Katrine will give a hands-on example of how we employ that tool, the process of creating the impact framework with the applicants or the project leads. So before we actually decide whether to fund it or not. And at the end, Rasmus will talk about the data environment. How do we collect on all these things that we put in the sea, so to speak, beforehand. So we're actually not coming up with any. We haven't invented any new tools. We've actually reused a lot of material that exists. But we realized that coming from a background as evaluators, we've been there where you stand and you say, what was the purpose of the program that we're going to evaluate? And people do not necessarily agree. And do you have any data? And those two simple questions are often very complicated to answer. And there might be many different reasons for that. Could be that people who own the programs are no longer there. Could also be that people who perform the programs are no longer there also. And so, yeah, perceptions can change over time. So that's mainly the reason for doing what we're doing. Yeah. Should we switch seats?
Yeah, let's do
that.
Thank you very much, Henrik. And my name is Gert. I'm a senior impact partner in the Evaluation Analysis department. And what I would like to talk about is how we build this unified evaluation culture in NF. And I will focus on the impact framework, both the impact framework tool, but also how we apply it. And the impact framework is, you could say, essential in building the management approach. And for such, you could say the impact framework process we have been working very actively with. We have set up around 60 impact frameworks now for standalone grants and also for strategic grants. And if you look at the whole framework process as such, we can actually break it down into 4 different process steps. The first process step is the overall narrative, and that is a preparational process step to working with the logic model. And here you could say the focus is everything you have to have in place before you're ready to work with the logic model. With the logic model, we focus on success factors and effect change. And that leads on to the data model, where we focus on the indicators and also on, you could say, ensuring that all the data is available, also is collected. And that leads on to a plan for a follow-up, which has to do with both reporting, monitoring, and evaluation. And now the AEA conference had a storytelling perspective, and that you can also use on these process steps, because it is a refining of a story idea. The overall narrative is, so to speak, a synopsis or comprehensive summary of plots, characters, and events without too much details. The logic model being a storyboard where it's a representation of events in a special logic order. And then there is a detailed script that both covers a data model and also a plan for a follow-up, and so to speak, gives a blueprint for a production process. And what is very important for us is that this production process happens in co-creation. And co-creation here has a number of stakeholders. The stakeholders are the applicant, it is a project lead from the grant giving area, and then it's a person from the evaluation and analysis department. And the reason why co-creation is so important to us is that it actually leads to co-ownership. And our experience in working with the impact framework process is that the earlier and the more we involve the stakeholders, the easier it is to give them a sense of co-ownership. And that co-ownership is important because it gives a higher probability that the stakeholders will use the impact framework actively as a tool also after they have signed the grant agreement. Let's try to go down into the process steps. As I said before, a synopsis is a summary, it's a long cycle perspective, but it's also the starting point, a creative process. A creative process where you corner the core concept and core structure of what it is you want to do, the whole story idea. And that's exactly what is happening at this process step. It is led by the project lead from the grant giving area together with the applicant. And here they describe what is the challenge that we face, what is it for a change we would like to make, what are we aiming for, what is the vision of the project, and also very concrete, what does success look like, both in a short term, medium term, and a long term basis. And what's the best vehicle to get you there? What is the setup? What is the instrument type that best fits this purpose? We also ask into the context where we would like to have some notions on the assumptions on the external factors and how they could influence the chance of success, either positively or negatively. All in all, you could say the reflections here are extremely important, both directly on the project, but also on the context for it, because it ensures that the project is mature enough and ready enough to go on to the next process level where they're going to work on the logic model. The reflections here will also feed directly into the next process step with a workshop. And for the second process step, the evaluation analysis department also joins up. So now we have three entities. We have the applicant, we have the lead from the grant giving area, and we have a person from the evaluation and analysis department. And what is important here is that we have a series of workshops. We are responsible for that, either in form of a physical workshop here in the foundation or an online workshop. And we're also responsible for multi-user platform boards where we can build the models in co-creation. What's really happening now is that together we look at the preparational step where we had the overall narrative, and then we break down into a number of success factors within the categories of input, activities, output, outcome, and impact. And the beauty of it is that when you have a finalized logic model and look at all the success factors, that is exactly what success looks like for a given project. Of course, we're also interested in the logic of the logic model, so the relation between success factors is also important. Here we define it as effect change, and these effect change is important for the project because whenever we have an activity, you want to be sure that it has a progression towards an intended impact. And if a success factor does not fit into effect chain, there will not be a place for it in the logic model. You could say that some success factors are more important than others. And I'm sure you know the concept of the critical success factor. In the foundation, we call it impact markers. And we define it as some success factors that are necessary stepstones for success or early indicators of success. It actually just means that we focus more specific on these success factors when we do the monitoring and the evaluation. As such, you could say the logic model is relatively simple, but it's not linear, even though it could look like that. We are aware of there are a lot of feedback loops within the model, but we chose to use the simple model to focus on success factors and the relations between them. If we take a effect chain from the logic model and transfer it to a data model, it would look something like this. The data model connects the success factors to indicators and data sources, and as a detailed script, you can say it brings the story to life. To the left column, you can see the categories input, activities, output, outcome, and impact from the logic model. In the first column, we have the success factor, and here is the effect chain. We have some funding resources leading to some research and related activities that lead to some research outputs, that lead to some new knowledge that finds use in research, leading to new knowledge influencing health practices. To the left of that column, we have the indicators, and every success factor have one or more indicators, and those indicators we use to measure to what degree the success factor has been achieved. To the right of the indicator column, there are three columns, and that's the data sources for the indicators. So for the funding resources, we have an indicator that is the amount funded, and the data source here is our administration system, Norma, where you can track the funding that comes from the foundation to the grant, but we also have a data source in ResearchFish that tracks the attracted funding that the grants get on the way. Then we have the research-related activities, and those are reported through status reports to the foundation. And the research outputs, here we have set up publications, but it can be a lot of different things. It can be data models, can be databases, it can be research methods, research tools, collaborations, and here also publications. Publications, I think, are the most used output category in ResearchFish. For new knowledge that finds use in research, an indicator could be citations, and that is based on reporting on publications in ResearchFish, but with some data enrichment from the NNF impact team. Then we have the new knowledge influencing health practices, and an indicator for that could be the clinical guidelines that cites NNF-funded research. That is again based on the reporting on publications in ResearchFish, but with the add-on data analysis from the NNF impact team. So it is just a very simple description of how the data model works. The last process step that is also important and made in co-creation is a plan for reporting, dialogue, and evaluation. There are three elements here: reporting, dialogue, and evaluation. And for the reporting, we have the systems reporting, that is ResearchFish or the Founded system. We have annual reports, particularly for research centers, but on a more organizational perspective. And then we have the status reporting that I just mentioned. The element dialogue is related to the dialogue between the foundation and the project. And as you can see in the table below, that those meetings are based on a dashboard report. All the scientific officers in the foundation can use the internal dashboard that is fed by data from the systems reporting to build reports as a material underlying these dialogue meetings. Then we have the last element that is evaluations, and I set up both an internal midterm evaluation that could be in the format of PowerPoint report focusing on milestone progression and based on the dashboard data, our logic model, and a project plan. And in terms of setting up an evaluation report that is external, of course, they have also they will have the access to the data we use for the internal report, plus some more depending on the scope of the specific report. Those were the first process step, and what are then our learnings based on that? First, you could say that the smaller project experience at impact frameworks deliver insights on gaps in effect chains and project design. And we have quite a lot of workshops where PIs had this eureka moment suddenly experiencing that there was a gap in the effect chain in a project that they built themselves. So that has turned out to be really efficient. For research centers that are more used to work with these kind of tools, there's more been an alignment of expectation on what they're going to be measured on. All in all, you can say the approach has been really positive from the external stakeholders. They would like to be a part of the impact culture. And also they are very interested in using the impact frameworks, both to influence performance, decision-making, and efficiency. So I say we are in the start of a journey, but the results have been really positive until now.
Gert, do you want to take a question or two before we turn over to Katrine? Didi, I don't know if you've been monitoring there might be one in the chat or.
No, we don't have any in the chat, but I do see a hand raised.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give the word on to Katrine.
Yeah, someone else.
Hello, sorry, I think it's my hand raised. Can you hear me?
That's right. Yes, you can, Tom.
Fantastic. So hi, I'm Tom Reedford from Versus Arthritis in the UK, arthritis research charity. I'm afraid I missed the start of the presentation, so forgive me if you've already covered this, but it'd be really helpful to find out. This is fascinating, and it's very interesting to see how similar it is to our own frameworks and our own systems that we've been developing over the past year, which is reassuring. My question is, how do you do this at scale, and what's the scale of the number of projects in which you deploy this approach with? Because we have hundreds of research projects ongoing, and we've got a limited capacity to do this. So I'm interested in how you would how you plan or how you are managing to deliver that at scale. And if I could, how many years afterwards would you follow up? Because of course we have this, we follow up with Research Fish for a few years afterwards with our grants, but sometimes citations and policy links happen much later on after that. So I'd be interested in that as well if I could.
Yeah, so I guess the first part is how we are organizing our grant awarding model. I think we receive around 4,000+ applications a year, right? Most of them go into open competition, and most open competition programs, we do not employ these impact frameworks. There are some programs in the social space where they're asked to deliver their own logic model, but it's not part of the work we do in the impact area. What we do is that we develop a logic model for the program, because the purpose of the open competition program is to sort of spread risk, right? So you hand out 100 investigator grants, but you know that 70% of them will fail or be just regular research, and then maybe there will be some that are above average and a few that are the stars. And so we don't do impact frameworks for those individual grants, so only for the program. So then we have the part that's called standalone grants, and standalone grants are not in open competition. So it's a negotiation with an applicant who supplies an application that goes into review, and then the board decides whether to fund it or not. Those can be between $150,000 and $300 million. So it's a very wide space. But what we say is that typically when it goes above $2 million, or 2 million euros actually, we do an impact framework. And that amounts to about 60 to 70, I would say 60 impact frameworks a year, probably. Yeah. But we also, but we're quite effective in the way we do it. We also sort of don't let the good get in the way of, let perfect get in the way of good enough. So we might not be satisfied, but if the project lead and the applicant are satisfied and we think it's good enough, then we leave it at that, because we have to move on. We're very few, so we keep 5 to 10 impact frameworks. We juggle 5 to 10 impact frameworks at a time, basically, each of us. Yeah.
And maybe also to add on that we have also focused a lot on developing really thorough training material and work material that project leads and the groups can work with when we're not there as well. So we can consult and we can facilitate, but they can also do a lot of the work in their own project group with the applicant when we don't necessarily have to be there at every step of the time.
That's great.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
To learn a lot. And what Gert showed the preparation, the one pager we do. The one pager is basically just to calibrate at what level is the applicant or the project lead. Where do we have to start off? And how much can we let them work on their own? And how much do we have to help them?
We can actually say that we now put more emphasis in the first project than we did in the beginning. And that was because the projects were actually not mature enough. They were not ready to be a part of the discussion on the logic model. And for us, it was really important that they were ready so that actually they could become the co-owners of building the logic model and not just being passive on board. So exactly. So the idea was that if they had all these discussions, all the reflections before going into the collaboration with our department, it would be easier to make the project run. And that is our experience, that really made a big difference.
Well, thank you for that question, Tom. Katrine? Yeah.
Great. Okay. So from looking at the sort of broader process steps, I'm gonna now take it down to a very practical level and go through a specific example and highlight through this example some of the learnings, the overall learnings we've had, both as evaluators, but also how we often see that it can actually help improve the project and the eventual or the final application that they submit for funding to the foundation. So the example that we've chosen to go through is a postdoctoral program. So we fund a postdoc program within the clinical translational medicine, focusing on training these postdoctoral researchers into both clinical research, but also the translational part, so linking them to industry. To give a sense of the scale, it's about $19 million program and funds like a portfolio of postdocs within this program. So what we do is that we have this, after they have filled out the one pager, we then go to a workshop where we start off with a brainstorm of the program. And we start off by looking at the vision. So because before the vision is really in place and good, it doesn't make sense to work on the logic model. So for this program, the vision is to strengthen translational ecosystem to improve citizen and patient health. So that's like the overall vision where we ultimately want to end up with the program. And the way we do that is to start with a brainstorm and just get the applicant and the project leads to brainstorm what is it that you want to do with the program. So not looking into the specific activities or outputs, impact and so on yet, but just what does the program want to do? And for this one, they wanted to be a bridge between build a bridge between clinical research and industry. They wanted to strengthen translational medicine ecosystem in Denmark. They wanted to evolve the research careers of the postdocs in the program. They also, there's also the research activities that are actually occurring in the individual postdoctoral research projects. They also want, again, because it has this translational focus, they also wanted to ultimately have new products and devices being produced from the program. And because it is a career program, there's also a large part of mentoring involved. So the postdocs in it would be mentored by both people in the clinical space, but also by people in the industry to, again, become this bridge between the clinical and the industry space within medicine. There's also a larger network perspective to it, not only for the postdocs involved in it, but also for the instructors and everybody else involved in the program. They also mentioned that they wanted to increase the trust towards translational medicine, which is a very high goal to have. And then of course there's also specifically the education and training and courses that they are producing and putting these postdoctoral fellows through. So for this, we just start with having them all bunched together, and sort of on a practical level, we do this on just on cards, and then we put them physically up on a wall. Yes, so the next part is then that we start organizing it, and for this, we have found that it makes sense to break all of the different success factors into different categories. And for this one, we could see that, well, there's the three overall themes in it. There's something to do with the people involved, so the actual postdocs entering the program. So for those, we want to specifically, or the program wants to specifically help their research careers. They want to put the people through education and courses specifically aimed towards translational medicine in order to give these people the specific skill set needed. They also wanted the postdocs themselves to become this bridge between the clinical research and the industry. Then there's also the networks, the wider networks aimed at people, both the postdocs involved and also the instructors and program leaders and all of this as before mentioned. And finally, the mentoring part, that's very like the one-to-one mentoring between people from industry and the clinical space towards the postdoc involved. Then for research, well, they had research activities listed before in the brainstorm, and they also had some new products and devices that they wanted to ultimately come out of it. But by putting it up, even though we haven't put it up in the full logical model yet, but just in this overall category, it becomes quite clear that there is quite a gap between doing research activities and then ending up with new products and devices. There's a lot in between that to happen. And likewise, at the program level, they wanted to increase the overall trust towards translational medicine, but during the brainstorm session, nothing really geared towards that goal was mentioned. And then overall, all of this should support a strengthened translational medicine ecosystem in Denmark. So the next part is then, once we have had the structure and we can see that there are gaps, is to fill out those gaps. So for example, for the research activities, well, after the research activities, there are some specific research and innovation outputs. These can be used for further research and innovation, and ultimately that can lead to new products and devices. So that in that way, we could help fill out the logical train towards actually getting new products and devices. And at the program level, as mentioned, they were really keen on increasing the trust towards translational medicine, but in their application and in the initial work with the logic model, they didn't really have anything, any activity specifically aimed towards its goal. So what actually ended up happening was a whole track of including communication and outreach activities in the application and in the program, which would then lead to Bridge as being a stamp of the program is called Bridge, being a stamp of quality, which can then ultimately increase the trust towards translational medicine. So finally, I just want to show how the final logic model looks. I am not going to go into the details of it, but it has these overall effect chains within research, people, and the program, all leading towards various different impacts that all supports the final vision of strengthening the translational ecosystem. And this is what is attached to the final application and what is then shown to the board as part of the final application for approval. And because this is now a standardized model, we have found that it is also easier then to evaluate and get a good overview and a quick overview of what the program actually wants to accomplish. So that's really beneficial internally, but we have also gotten the response from applicants that is useful actually for themselves to not only during the process of creating the application and creating the project, to fill out those gaps and ensuring that you're actually working towards the final impact that you want, but also useful as a communication tool towards maybe if it's a bigger research center towards other parts of the research organization, or even outwards towards a broader society to tell what the program actually wants to succeed with. So as Henrik mentioned, we have been through a lot of impact frameworks at this point, and we have of course collected a lot of learnings through going through these. And overall, the key points that we want to highlight here is that it's really important to get the buy-in from the applicant and the project lead. And this is closely linked to this as a co-creation process. So we want both the applicant and the internal project lead to take ownership of the problem of the impact framework as well, and to understand that it's important not only to get the alignment on the final evaluation, which of course it is, but also that it can actually help strengthen the project itself. The next part is that depending on who we have, because we have many various different projects, both from very basic science, we have quite applied science, but we also have social programs, we have humanitarian programs. But depending on the background of people, they might not have ever worked with a logic model or an evaluation model, and it can be difficult to get applicants to then look beyond the actual activities that are occurring in the project towards the final impact. But by breaking it down in these logic chains and by really saying like we get from point A to point B to point C through the activities, output, outcomes to activities, it becomes much less daunting for the applicants to say that they actually do have an effect on the impact in the end. Another thing that we often see is that in the initial steps, that there's too much focus on measurability. So for the brainstorming part here, we actually ask people to not worry at all about whether it can be measured, whether the
Hi folks, I apologize. I know we've had some technical issues. I think they've been pretty good at coming back. So if we can hang tight for a moment. Oh, yes.
hello again.
Hi.
Yeah. You're falling in and out.
Sorry about that. Let's just try and share again. Yes.
Thank you for your perseverance. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So I think I was just about to talk about the wide variety of backgrounds again, and how that can come with various kinds of challenges. Thank you. But and it can be especially hard for people from very basic research backgrounds to get them to look all the way to impact. But because it is this, because they are basic researchers and quite sort of natural science minded, they also tend to be quite logical thinking. So by putting them up in these logical steps, it really helps, and we can usually get them to the point of impact as well. Then timing. Gert was talking about it a little bit as well, that it really matters when we come in and start the work on these logic models. We have had instances of both us coming in way too early when the project doesn't have a vision yet, they don't really know what they want to do. And then at that point, we then provide them with this one pager. And then once they can fill that out and sort of fairly secure in that, we can then start the work on the actual logic model. Otherwise, we need to redo the logic model too many times. But we have also had the opposite, where we come in way too late and an application is almost ready to go for approval. And we are just being contacted just at the end, and that is also not good. So we're trying to get the timing more and more right by earing towards getting in early, and then we can also always say, let's come back and when you have this and this ready. Right, and then finally, the evaluation anxiety that we can see. So people can be anxious about being evaluated, but what we really try to stress here is that we want to be ambitious in the projects, and we want them to be risky, and that is okay that there is a risk to fail, but also that we do this impact framework work also to align on what is eventually they're going to be evaluated on. So if anything, it becomes less of a black box and they know from the get-go what is actually going to be evaluated on in the end. Great. I think that was what I had.
Yeah, so before we move on to Rasmus, because this kind of closes all the priming we're doing to set up that we that they buy into our impact thinking, that we are assured that we actually agree on the interpretation of maybe a 50 or 100-page long application in just a simple snapshot, and that we agree that there is a reporting standard and they understand why we actually care about reporting, and that it's not just something you do, it's actually important. So before we move on to Rasmus, who will then handle all of those data, it might be good to take a couple of questions. Yeah. I think Gretchen has a hand. I can't see the rest.
Yes, I did want to know what you are considering as impact for the basic research. I mean, they can anticipate how it's potentially going to be applied, but can you give me an example for a really truly basic research project? Unless you're kind of combining the basic and applied research together, which happens.
Yeah, so actually that can be very far-fetched from the actual project. So because as soon as we move into outcomes, we kind of say that's where the uncertainty is as to whether they will actually reach their outcomes, right? So the impact we want to lift to match what we're going for as a foundation. We want societal impact. So it could be new paradigms in a research field, but it could also be something that facilitates translational changes. It could have impact on industry. So, for example, right now we have examples of someone who wants to measure something, but it's actually a basic research approach. But the potential that it has for the bioindustrial sector is enormous. It can basically change how accurate you can measure very, very small particle size things without going into details, which is so measurement is very important in some of these life sciences areas, precision. So it has a huge potential for industry also. So we're trying we usually look at different levels. So how can it affect people at large? How can it affect industry or field? How can it affect sectors or society in general?
So if the research is successful, then being able to link it to those kinds of outcomes. So it could be 50 years away, but you can, it's a very good potential energy source or, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the issue that we do have in our model is that we put everything just in outcomes, where others would probably use short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. And what we see in those models is that what comes in long-term outcomes often coincides with what we think about as impact.
Right. Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Didi, do you see any other?
No.
No. Okay. Good. Then we go on. Thank you, Gretchen.
Great. Thank you. Hopefully this will. No. Yeah. No. Okay. Now it's working. Thank you. Like as mentioned, my name is Rasmus Jensen. I'm head of data in the impact area, which means I'm responsible for everything related to data, and of course also to the reporting platforms that we use for collecting all the nice data that the impact frameworks generate. What we're going to go through today is more on how we're actually telling a good story with all the data, because we use, as Henrik mentioned earlier, we use data for different purposes. The data that we collect, harvest from all the external sources and build up and integrate are used for learning at the grant level, like circling back the information to the grant holders to make sure that they can measure their own progress. Then we at the strategic level, as Henrik mentioned, which is on the program level, we do circle back and use the data for evaluation and learning to know what works at the program level and what does not work, how to improve the programs that we put in place. Then we use it for external communication. That's very important for us. It's important in order to be legitimate as a large foundation in Denmark. And that I'm going to touch a bit more upon later. And then our board of directors, they are using all this kind of data to make informed decisions on why are we going in a certain direction. How do we actually navigate with all the strategic choices that we have as a foundation? So they are doing this by taking informed decisions. How do we communicate about that? And like he mentioned, the different reports that we have. Two of those are the societal impact report. It's a data-driven report. Basically sum up all the results that we have collected over the last couple of years, 5 years normally. And then in the grant report, we have a more narrative focus where we will tell stories about the things that is happening based on our funding. So it's something more broad, more soft, telling all the good stories about what we do and why we're doing those.
Then we also summarize some of the things behind the scene. In the grant report, we talk about our policies and regulations, setup of boards. It's a more broad story about the foundation. But what we're going to talk about today is actually the impact dashboard, or what we call our NNF dashboard, and the Novo Nordisk Foundation dashboard. It has two different views. It's as mentioned earlier, it's an internal view, and it has an external phase 2. What you'll see here is that you can access all these free reports or from our webpage, novonordiskfoundation.dk impact. There you'll get access both to the dashboard, and you can download and read the reports. Behind all this, we have our data platform, and that's where the team that I'm heading is focusing our work. We source data from internal sources, which is the grant management system, Smart Simple. Gert called it Norma because we have a very elaborated or comprehensive rebuilding of the Smart Simple platform into our own system called Norma. Then we use Business Central for our financial things, collecting those data, combining those with external sources like data from Research Fish, Digital Science Dimensions, Web of Science, Scopus, and a number of other sources for patents and clinical trials. On top of that, we also have a proprietary system developed called Found Good. It's for the social humanitarian areas. All these data ends up in our data platform. It's Azure environment, pretty standard. I say pretty standard. This is for most people, it's not standard. It's rather complicated, and I will show you a simple version of how we're working with it in a couple of slides. Then, based on the data platform, what we do, we expose the data to different kind of users. We have advanced users to the data, and we have what we call consumers to the data. Consumers is the ones that just access data through the dashboard, the different versions of the dashboard. And then we have the advanced users, the ones that are able or capable of going back into the actual tables, into the data model, which lies behind the visualizations, and draw and build their own not publications, but their own dashboards or their own models for more advanced analysis. That could be both the analytical team around me, and it could also be the data scientists in my own team. Looking at the platform, so to speak, this is just a simple version, even though it's still rather complex. On the left-hand side, you'll have all the sources, the different sources that we use. Then we'll do a number of transformations and loadings and extractions. And then in the middle, you have what we actually call the data model, where we do a number of transformations related to our business logics. That will end up in a SQL database, which is our data model, that we then can use for sharing. It can be accessed in different ways, either through a simple Excel extract, but you can also access it through some of the more open source writing or statistical software like R, and you can use it. You can interface it with Python and so forth. So that just to say that it's not simple to do, but it is possible to get access to all the data at different levels. But before we jump into to look at how the actual data dashboard looks like, I want to take you through an example of how do we actually build up the story. For instance, how much did we fund in a given area? That could be in an open competition program. to answer this question or to tell this story, where we start is actually with the grant management system. From the grant management system, we extract a number of more like basic data. Could be something about the applicants, where the applicants are from, the host institutions. It could also be something about the evaluation data that is there. It could be the committee's scoring. It could be information about the reviewers and the review. Then we combine that with data from the two reporting systems. We use these two systems, FoundGood and ResearchFish. Most of you are probably aware and familiar with ResearchFish. We use it primarily for our basic and translational research programs and let's not stay with that. And then we use FoundGood for the programs we have within the education area, within outreach, within social and humanitarian. And then we also have developed a special section in there for research infrastructure, because we treat that as a special way of making sure that we're able to support really good research. So Smart Signal, the grant management system and the reporting systems, they both end up into the data platform. In the data platform, as I mentioned, we have APIs connections to external databases on, for instance, patents, clinical trials, but also some other data sources where we can extract, for instance, users and consumers data on that. We'll do a lot of the transformation here to prepare data for the data dashboard. We'll have set up governance and management systems here to make sure that who's has the access to the data. So now it ends up in our dashboard. It's a Power BI based dashboard. As I mentioned, it's for both internal use and for external use. It looks like this. It's just very simple, not very good picture of it. But what you do as an internal user of the dashboard, will have access through our intranet. You'll have a big red button in the corner of that, and then that takes you into the dashboard. And what they'll see when they land on the landing page is actually this picture. On the top, you'll have different different specialized views of the data behind the dashboard. And in the bottom, we have what we call a universe with a number of different planets. So you'll have the pipeline projects on the left-hand side, and you can follow those all the way through the life cycle of application, all the way until what we call impact and how we measure impact. The different views are used for different purposes. In impact, one of the things you'll be able to see is, for instance, this deep dive on open competition. Here you'll see some of the outputs from open competition projects. In this case, we're looking at tools, methods, and products as some of the outputs, but you'll also dive into, for instance, funding, education, and engagement. You will dive into publications and so forth. You can also do some more advanced analysis here, focusing on bibliometrics or commercial activities here. One of the great things about this dashboard is actually that you're able to filter and sort all the way down to a specific grant. So if you want to look at this specific grant within open competition on translational research, you'll able to do that by using the filter on the upper right corner. Another view that our board use is they used to follow these 9 impact principles that we have set up for the effect on and the measuring of effect on society. You'll see them listed on the left-hand side, those 9. I've just dived into one of them. One of them is to development of talent. But how do you actually measure that? We'll try to do that by looking at the number of team members. We have the lower left corner, or we could look at the distribution of different gender on the across the disciplines, the scientific disciplines in the upper right corner. Like that, you can have different views on how do we actually support talent in our programs. If we jump to the to one of the other views, and this is actually one of the views that is accessible for everybody, it's on the public version of the dashboard. Here you'll be able to see our support of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have divided those 17 different UN Sustainable Development Goals into 2 areas: what we support and how we support it. So in this case, you're able to dive into and see how does each of the programs, how does each of the grants that we award, how does they support the different SDGs. One example is the support to climate action. In this case, you'll have listed in the middle all the grants that are assigned to this or support this SDG. But you'll also be able to see how much we actually granted in this area on the left-hand side, and you also have a case on what is one of the larger grants that we have. But you also on the right-hand side, you can see some more like traditional climate action indicators like the CO2 scope. So how much do we actually have in terms of CO2 emission on scope 1, 2, and 3? That's combining data from the entire Novo Nordisk group. And then on the top right-hand corner, you're able to see how much we have funded in terms of publications within this area. What did we learn from this exercise? The first one is that without data quality and validation, we couldn't do much. That also means that I've been through this a couple of times, but and also I showed that it just seems like very simple to do. But if you look, if you have in mind the very rather complex data model we have behind this, this also means it takes a lot of time to actually build up data quality and validate the data to a level where we are able to trust it as a valid source. That means that we are pushing most of the validation and the work with data quality to individuals as close as possible to the actual source. So if we look at, for instance, the data that is reported by the grantees, we'll do a lot on training of the grantees to make sure that they actually report high quality data to us. But then having the view on the different dashboards also means that we'll need to take a stand or balance between the different users' needs. We'll have one specific needs from the board. We'll have another need from the wider public, and we have a third need from our data scientists. We'll need to balance that out, and that's not an easy task, because the board always, almost always, is the ones that we will cater for first, and that's yeah. It means that we sometimes need to not be as transparent as we want to be in terms of data for the public. One of the things that we have learned, and one of the things that we're really working on at the moment is increased involvement of advanced users in the building up of the dashboard and the data platform behind the dashboard. But we also do a lot of training and planning to increase that in the coming year, both for internal users and for external users. So with that, we'll still have some time for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rasmus. And I think you could actually that first point you made about the data quality and validation being close to the individuals.
Yeah.
And we talk about where we came from.
Mhm.
So in 2007, we were no employees. We just funded a large center, no evaluation policy, anything. And then to 2015, first research fish collection.
Yeah.
And then we did all the data validation every time we had to work with research fish data. And that's what you pushed back basically to the grant owners, right?
Yeah.
So before we would do this for the research centers because we would have a disagreement about what the data looked like, and then we had to align that. But now, if there's a disagreement, then it's on their part, right? And
Yeah,
that's pushing it back.
Yeah, because all the data is actually ready available and easy accessible for them to when they have submitted the data, then they are able to see what is actually there, and then they can go back into Research Fish or in FoundGood and redo their submission to make sure that we have the right data. So they are not. It's much easier from our side, and it's much easier from their perspective. So I think there's a couple of questions, at least there's two mentions in the chat. Didi, will you lead the discussions?
I'd be happy to. I don't see any additional questions in the chat.
See
but-
3 points in the chat. The chat says 3 at least, but
Yes, there's some messages about folks coming and going, so I don't see any questions. Yes, are there any questions from attendees who want to maybe unmute and ask your questions live?
Oops, if I can. Hi, it's Gretchen. Let me get myself hidden as well. Sorry about that. This is frustrating.
but we can hear you.
Yes. Wonder what's, oh, there we go. So I'm so glad that you've done this because I was sorry to miss the conference and then hear how absolutely wonderful your presentation was. And it's just it's really excellent to see. And I have lots of questions actually. So you must have logic models for your own internal work as well?
Oh, yes.
Because I think that would be fascinating for people who wanted to learn from you to also see. Although, and here's a silly one, but I have to ask it and you don't have to answer. Does the Gates Foundation have anything like this, or do the other really big funders have such a system? I know the Gates has a data system that I saw years ago, but I don't know if it's logic model based.
No, I mean, we worked on a couple of co-funded projects with Gates. And so we sort of learned that they work in a different way. They work more in agile teams where they are focused on one or very few projects at a time, and they work intensively on that. But then their evaluation approach is locally anchored. So ours is different. The evaluation approach is central in our place. At least kicking it off. I mean, for us, this is still an experiment because we're only priming new initiatives based on what we learned from not doing it before. But we still have to learn whether evaluation practices will be good or not, because the evaluations are owned by the program owners. So those that have the internal project lead who designs the initiative together with an applicant, perhaps, and then that's spun out as a grant. But it's that project lead in the foundation who sits in the program areas. So the natural and technical sciences, the medical science area, the biotech area, obesity, nutrition, infectious diseases, and so forth. That they own the evaluation. So what we're now doing is following up with them about remembering that they have an impact framework that should guide their evaluation.
One more, unless somebody else says something. Are you familiar with by any chance, with the Canadian Alliance for Health Services and Policy Research framework, impact framework.
I think we come across it.
Yeah, I think we come across it, but
It's interesting because it's actually, and it probably doesn't, well, it might apply. I mean, because as a disciplinary area, they created a framework, and it's very based on collective action, and in terms of even planning the research strategically in that area. And then it also is looking in terms of the translational medicine, it is looking at the logic, all of the things that have to happen almost in a value chain in order to get something from the research into the adoption. You know, working with the clinicians to be sure that some work is taken off their plate so that they can actually introduce this new practice, and working with the patients to make sure that they actually take the advice they're given in the hospital. And I'm not sure if that applies to anything that you're doing, but it seemed to me to be this whole idea of a value chain. And looking at that, when you look at translational medicine, really makes a difference. So it seems like it might be, and it's a way of thinking. I don't know if you've run into it before.
Yeah, we have, and we've also had discussions with someone from the UK who's done something similar. I think what happens in the translational area is often that the logic model actually becomes very linear. So it actually moves from activities to outcomes. Whereas when we do the research projects, it's very different. Outcomes feed into new activities, and it's a mess. But I think what we're moving into next is actually that we've actually tried to move away from indicators and being specific, and try to just generate a story that's completely a narrative and completely verbal. But then after that, then looking at indicators and that. But what we're missing is this value creation in short. So we're trying to develop sort of it's not a cost, you can call it a cost benefit approach, but it's more simple than that. It's when it's flux, when it's insecure what the outcomes will be, it's a pros and cons. But when it becomes more specific, we can generate these costs and benefits at different levels. Some will be tangible, some will be intangible, and all that. But we're only developing that now, so we haven't employed it. But the idea is actually what you're talking about is that the logic model is not specific enough. It's guiding, and it shows pathways towards success, and that helps applicants in formulating their project. But the specificity of that impact, we have not captured that in our impact framework. So that's what we want to add on, and I guess that actually kind of resembles what you're saying about the value chain or the value creation.
Yeah, it's looking at the diffusion, pushing people to look at the diffusion of the innovation, and in order to know what actors that they need to include even in their research while they're doing.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Thanks, though. I think I love the balance of the simple, keeping it simple, because that makes it doable. And that's the way you have to build on something as big as this. That's good. Thanks.
Thank you.
I see another question in the chat from Rosalina. Would you like to unmute, or I can read it?
Yeah, just you can read it while we're trying to get it off.
Okay. I think I see her coming up.
I can read it. Thank you very much for a great presentation. And I think somebody else brought this up earlier, but I just wanted to ask again, like, how long do you track the projects for, knowing that you're tracking programs as well as individual research projects, especially after the funding period ends? Like, what is a good rule of thumb? Like, how long do you track projects for? Because impact especially can take a longer time to demonstrate. And then secondly, related to the dashboards, how often are the dashboards refreshed? because there's so many different data sources that you're pulling from, the data that is populating these dashboards. Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Let me ask the first one first. What we do is depending on the length of the project. If it's a project that is less than 3 years, we follow that for 3 years, the 3 successive years, so to speak. So actually, we're following a 3-year project for 6 years. If the project is longer than 3 years, we're following for 5 years after the project ended. So that will be for up to 10 years actually that we follow the given project. So that will hopefully capture also the late arrivals of in terms of output and outcomes. And for the dashboard, it updated daily. As mentioned, we have a very large set of APIs that and have automated processes. So we can update data from the reporting platforms, from our grant administration system daily. There of course will be things that we pre-calculate and only updates once a month, but it's a minor part of the actual dashboards.
And maybe just to add on, how do we capture sort of longer term outcomes and impacts? We also ensure that we have the base indicator from the activities being reported within that period. So for example, publications, but then we can track many years after, do these publications end up in patents? Do they end up in clinical guidelines? But because we ensure through the impact framework and the data model behind it, that we have those key data points being collected, then we can actually follow up on those longer term outcomes and outputs and impacts later on. And we also ensure that in our grant agreements that we have a good acknowledgement policy. So they have to acknowledge our grant, so we can then scrape that afterwards in larger databases if it's not being reported to us, if it goes beyond that 3 or 5 year period of reporting after the grant has ended.
But you could say in a nutshell, the width of the data points narrows very much towards.
Oh yeah.
Applications. So
End of the year.
Or anything with a DOI and an acknowledgement.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And I think we have a challenge of our awardees. They just forget to cite the grant sometimes in a publication, or so it's always a constant education to them to keep citing, because that helps us downstream. But thank you.
Welcome.
There was one on the cost, Rasmus.
Yeah. I don't really know how much it costs to build a dashboard, but it took a year and a half from start to finish to get to the point where we are at the moment. But we are constantly developing and evolving the dashboard. So I think
if you would say a split between you had external consultants.
We have external.
So how many FTEs would you say that was?
We had 2 external consultants for almost a year on board working part-time on the project, and then we had 3 people working internally for the duration of this time. So yeah, that's the maintaining wise. We're able to keep it at a minimum and cover that the maintenance by my team, which is 5 people today. So it's not a big task to maintain the dashboards and the platform.
Great. Didi, you're the boss here.
Yes, well, we are at time, and so I want to thank the 4 of you for presenting, and then thank the attendees for attending. And this webinar will be available for viewing on the YouTube channel, and we will share that information via the listserv and other means. So thank you again.
Welcome.
and
Thank you.
I guess,
Thank you for all the
yeah.
questions, and do get in touch with us if you have any questions or want to collaborate on anything.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and folks, if you have any additional questions, you can get in touch with RTD TIG, and then we'll try to connect you to the folks at Novo Nordisk Foundation. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.